Wisconsin is going back to work.
I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
This is Rewind, Wisconsinized summary of this week in the Capitol. JR, there was no discussion between us on the top story. A tie between Governor Walker and Mary Burke, 46-46. Source on that is the Marquette University Law School poll. Mm-hmm. My eyebrows went up. Yours?
I think the general impression I got from talking to people is that it wasn't what they expected. They were thinking maybe still a Walker lead of some sort because not much has happened in the last month or so.
I was going to ask you, has the governor had a bad 2 months?
It might be. If you look at the poll, from what Charles Franklin, the director, was saying, is that Democrats are coming home to Mary Burke, and she's doing better with young people and women. So that might be part of what's going on. Now, you talk to Republicans, they will say they oversample Democrats, the sample's a little bit skewed. But the bottom line for Mary Burke is this: she has a story to tell right now to national groups. Hey, Emily's List, hey, DGA, we are tied. We're in good shape. You should spend money here. And that may be the biggest thing. Even if the poll's not dead on with where things are at, it does give her a boost in that regard.
Well, and 2 weeks from now is the Democratic State Convention. Boy, that's a big shot in the arm for Burke and her speech and everything. I mean, it's really going to jazz that group up.
And remember, Republicans have been pushed this idea that there's a divided base with Democrats when it comes to Mary Burke. But you look at that poll, and she got 66% of the votes of Democrats and independents who plan to vote in the primary in August. Brett Hulsey was at what, 3%?
3%.
So as somebody pointed out to me, he's in a statistical dead heat with two people nobody's heard of. There are 4 people running for governor right now as Democrats. They each got 1%, so 1-1-3 at Brett and 66 for her. I mean, he's not really taking off in any way, shape, or form. There is not really a divided base, if you will. There are people probably not happy with Mary Burke, but as far as there being like some giant division, that's just not there.
I want to, something you said earlier, I want to come back to. The March poll, 27% of those 801, I think, said self-identified as Democrats. The May poll, 32%. Is that a big deal?
Well, what Franklin was explaining during the presentation this week was that Democrats are more likely to identify themselves as Democrats right now. There's a segment of the population that they may be a Democrat or Republican, but when the party's not doing well or they're feeling dispirited, they won't say, I'm a blank.
Oh, I see.
So some of that's kind of changing, maybe people more excited. I mean, but the dynamics of the race overall remain that Walker's the incumbent. It looks like a decent Republican year nationally. How will that kind of tide play in Wisconsin? And his supporters say he's got a ceiling of about 53%, maybe 52%, that he'll never be a Tommy Thompson 60% guy in election. But you can win at 50+1, and that's all they care about. And you know, once the ad wars fire up, that's when you're really going to see the needle move in this race.
Let's spend another minute here on some of the details here. 51% said they hadn't heard enough, didn't know enough about Burke, yet she's still tied, even though...
Referendum on Scott Walker. I mean, that is the clearest example of how this is all about Scott Walker.
52% felt the state going in the right direction. 68%, 2 out of 3, agreed that Walker is, quote, someone who is able to get things done, close quote.
And I've asked you about this before because his job approval rating has been higher, generally speaking, than his poll number in Marquette, and the right track, wrong track numbers have been better for him than the job approval rate. So why is that? Is he not getting credit for what's happening in the state? Do people not want to give him credit because they don't like him for some reason? There's some lag for him between how the state is doing and how people perceive him as the governor.
And then last point, JR, the Dems say, this proves our point. Sure, most people didn't know Mary Burke, but once you get to know her and her message, you'll like her. Is that true?
Possibly, but remember, 51% don't have an opinion of her. She's still tied. That's, again, about Scott Walker. It's a referendum on him.
Understand. Okay, new subject. Healthcare numbers. I was intrigued. 83,000 Wisconsin residents are now on MA because they fall under the poverty guidelines. That's the good news. The bad news is 63,000, almost, were told you're no longer eligible for MA, BadgerCare. You have to go out to the marketplace, Obamacare. Mixed bag?
A little bit. What's been interesting is Tammy Baldwin, U.S. Senator, has been pushing the Walker campaign about this decision because remember, Governor Walker had a choice in the budget to either accept federal money to expand Medicaid or to do what he did, which was change eligibility standards and then push folks off from the exchange, saying, hey, we want to rely on the marketplace. He's also touted that they're, from the first time in state history, everybody who lives on the poverty line has access to health care through Medicaid.
Yes.
That's a good thing to him. What Baldwin's asking, though, has been asking is, what about the folks you're pushing off of BadgerCare.
To 63,000.
So where are they? And as of this week, they didn't know. The ministry did not know what happened to all of them.
There are no numbers available, which is frustrating.
They don't know how many have purchased health care or whatnot. So there is that question of, okay, we got these people enrolled in BadgerCare, but what about the ones you pushed off? How successful have they been getting those guys to transition into a marketplace? And the hospital folks have been concerned for months about the idea of people who have been dependent upon a government program, all of a sudden now forced to figure out subsidies, figure out which plan to purchase, a monthly premium. How is that going to work for those folks? And that's still a big question for them.
One of my benchmark subjects that I touch base with on this issue is Bob DeVita. He's CEO of Common Ground. It's a nonprofit, and it's a startup in the wake of the ACA. And I talked to him just yesterday, and he said we had a goal. We wanted 10,000 members by the end of this year. They're at 20,000. So he said it's going pretty well for us, and we're meeting a need. Hey, third subject. GAB said this week, lobbyists can deliver money at any time, any place, budget sessions. How big a deal is that?
Well, what's interesting is, one, their initial interpretation of the law was there's a drafting error in here, and you guys wrote this thing in a way to say lobbyists cannot personally furnish, and that's the key word, furnish a check from one of your clients, from an interest group.
Or a PAC.
Yeah, I mean, this is a common practice where lobbyists represents, 3 or 4 groups, collects checks from the members and delivers them and say, hey, because it compounds the power of those contributions. Like, we have a constituency that's interested in you and this issue. There would be ways to get around that if they really had to, but the way the JB interpreted the law, which was not the way it was intended, was basically going to make life kind of difficult for these guys. The GAB has irritated, especially Republicans, lawmakers, for a while now with various interpretations of the law, and this is an issue that they were just grinding their teeth about, like, why this, why now? And then, interestingly enough, the day of the meeting, the staff says, whoa, we're changing our position and saying that no, it may not look the right way, but was intended this way. Let's go back to
After we get a letter from Speaker Voss and Majority Leader Fitzgerald,
we have concerns.
And there's an audit pending on GAB, let's connect a few of these dots.
I mean, there is no doubt that Republicans are going to take a shot at trying to reform, change, obliterate, whatever word you want to use, the Government Accountability Board next session. The question is, what will it look like? Going back to the old elections board, which is partisan board, some people actually have advocated that to me that yes, it'd be better to have it more transparent and nakedly partisan than it is now. Others are like, that's a horrible way. We had a horrible time with it before. But what they could do, and the frustration for Republicans is the staff. They feel like the judges, basically rely on the staff very heavily to bring them stuff, to say, this is what we think you should do. And the judges are kind of like, well, yeah, if you guys have spent time on it, we're going to go along with it. But how do you clear out staff? How do you take the partisanship out of staff? How do you make sure they're all neutral in every way, shape, and form? That's a very difficult thing to do.
And you and I know the old elections board didn't work because if the Republicans were in control and then the Democrats back and forth, that pendulum was so frustrating to cover. It was awful.
Ask Mark Green and Tom Barrett about converting federal funds to state
I remember that. Huge issue. I had a chance to interview Ag Secretary Ben Bransel, and I was interested in what he said. Number one, between 2007 2012, we lost 11% of Wisconsin farms, but we lost 18% of the dairy farms. I just find that fascinating. And all this comes from the USDA census. We also lost 52% of our hog farms in this 5 years. It's just fascinating. But the number that really is a takeaway for me, the average principal operator of a farm in 2012 made only $44,000. That's a pretty tough sell. You got 2 sons.
My grandfather's a dairy farmer in Kenosha County for a long time. So it's a much different world than it was back then. I mean, the size of operations are also humongous now compared to the family farm where you had X heads of cattle that you would go out and milk every day. That doesn't exist as much anymore.
Yeah. Bransell says the $44,000 salary is a challenge, and you have to have a passion for farming.
Right.
Well, okay, JR, time for WisPolitics Stock Report, please.
Rising Mary Burke. I mean, the numbers are, again, just good news for her. She can go out and sell this story of, hey, we're doing all right. And Republicans have kind of said, hey, poll might not be quite right. We still feel like the dynamics are there for Governor Walker to win. But even they've said, yeah, she's got something to sell right now to say, hey, I'm doing okay, and this is an even race 6 months out.
Okay.
Mixed structural deficit. We saw numbers from LFB this week. It inched down slightly. You still have a more than $600 million hole.
642 potential hole.
Now, it's a hole in theory because it doesn't take account for any kind of spending cuts or revenue growth. Republicans will tell you up and down there'll be plenty of revenue growth, take care of that money come next summer. Now, here's the thing. Governor Walker, if, and again a big if, he wins re-election this fall, he's promised big, bold tax reform, right? Every dollar in that structural deficit is one less dollar for tax reform unless you're going to cut deep. So where do they cut? My bet is still in talking to people that he's going to go after the property tax rolls in terms of tech colleges, spend the money, pull the rest of the way off. That's a big, giant chunk of money off your property tax bill. So watch that next spring if Governor Walker comes back and if Republicans control it.
Just a PS on that issue. I think on page 4 of that Fiscal Bureau memo, it compared the structural 642 to past structurals. That was the lowest in about 20 years.
Much better shape we have been before. And then
falling?
The GAB. I mean, back we were just talking about. I mean, they are in a difficult position in which, even if they're trying to do the best they can, Republicans right now are suspicious of the agency in general. They want something done. Senator Tom Tiffany, Representative Dave Craig this week had an op-ed piece saying, we want more oversight. Now the hitch about that, besides what method you're going to use, is if they go too far or if they do something really dramatic with the GAB, they will get pummeled in the editorial pages. Now I don't know how much that matters sometimes anymore to people. But it still is one of those things that's going to be a little tricky, so watch how that plays out next spring.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
And that's Rewind for this week. Thank you.